coming off the neck injury, and there were a lot of questions about, what was going to happen. They brought him back on a 1-year deal, and it sort of surprised me, but I thought it was a good idea. This was inarguably a different offense before he got hurt on November 20th against New England. He was really developing as such a unique and versatile red zone threat. I think he had 6 receiving touchdowns, which was almost double what he'd had in any season prior. Luck was really using him as sort of a safety valve in those situations. And then he was also running hard, running in that kind of power style that Chuck Pagano likes. But I think there's a couple things right now that are going to play out. He got arrested, charged with marijuana possession in Ohio, which really isn't, on the scale of things to do, I guess it's not that huge of a crime. Yeah. But it's something that's not been a great offseason for the Colts in that regard. I don't think that alone's going to keep him out, but it's certainly something that is in the back of your head. And then I think you got to kind of wait and play out. There were rumors yesterday about maybe Frank Gore being a potential addition. San Francisco, of course, saying today that they're going to do everything in their power to keep him. But, DeMarco Murray, and watch how that plays out. I think a lot of that's going to impact Bradshaw. If they don't sign another free agent, then I think it's more likely he comes back. If they do bring in a Gore or Murray or somebody like that, I'm not sure that there'll be as big a push to include him in the mix.
With all this talk, insightful talk about the running back situation with the Colts, certainly a player with a huge question mark on him is Trent Richardson. Without necessarily talking about the kinds of seasons he's had per se or what they're going to do about it, the reality is I want to get your view on Trent Richardson because of he's had problems since he's joined the Colts. His rookie season, he seemed to at least, have the gusto to make a difference in the NFL. But then in the past 2 seasons, he's looked flat. He's looked far less explosive than he did when he was with the Browns. From your perspective or your view, do you think it's the scheme? Do you think it's Trent? Do you think it's a combination of both?
Yeah, I think there's almost kind of a mental block with him right now. I don't know if it's because of the trade. Last year especially, he was really shaken up when he first came over, and he was clearly taken aback by the fact that Cleveland had given up on him. And it took him a while to kind of adjust to everything here. This year over the summer, he seemed better with it. There were some sparks early. He had about 77, maybe 79 yards in 3 quarters against Cincinnati early in the regular season. He got hurt in the third quarter, late in the third quarter of that game. He hurt his hamstring, and it just seemed like he never really recovered from that. He couldn't ever, it wasn't really anywhere near that level again, and obviously he was never at a level where people could really expect of, a guy who was taken number 3 overall. It really feels like both sides have kind of begun the divorce proceedings here. There's a report earlier today, I think, out of the Indianapolis Star that I'm quite certain came from his agent, that the reason that he missed the AFC Championship game had to do with complications from a pregnancy with his girlfriend. There's going to be a fight, I think. Wow. So it'll be interesting to see how all that plays out. Obviously, the Colts suspended him kind of after the fact there. There's been speculation that they're going to try to use that suspension to void the final year of his contract. And it really feels like both sides are kind of digging in for a fight there right now. And really, if they've gotten to that point, that kind of tells me that they're both kind of looking to move on. Maybe there's been attempts to see if there's any interest in the trade market. But it looks like the Colts are trying to find a way to get out from under that final year. And obviously he and his people are going to do everything they can in their power to make sure he gets that guaranteed money. But it really seems like they're in the beginning stages here of a breakup.
I'm glad you told us about sort of what had happened right there at the end of the season, because all indications up until now have been that, Trent was the bad guy, like the really bad guy. This was all his fault. It was almost, made you feel like it was a Jonas Gray situation where he overslept, or that he himself had given up on the team.
Yeah, I think one thing about Trent through everything, he's always been really a stand-up guy in the locker room. He stood there and he's answered every question. At times, you kind of wondered if he wasn't a bit, I don't want to say delusional, but it did make you wonder. I mean, as the struggles would go on more and more and more, and he would just stand up there and say, he knows who he is, and this Sunday is going to be the Sunday, and it just obviously never came to pass. But he always has been a guy that stood up and answered the questions. And, it'll be interesting to see how everything plays out with what exactly did go on during the AFC Championship game. But there have been other reports now that, during the year he was fined more than once for going over weight. The team's prescribed weight for him. He had an issue where he missed a meeting at some point during the regular season, was fined for that. So just little things, maybe maturity things. But I don't think anything where you look at this guy and would consider him a character risk or anything like that.
Well, I'm looking at overthecap.com, and he is guaranteed close to $3.2 million for the season, which will be the actual amount of cap savings should the Colts cut him. So I suppose that's a little bit more than you'd want to pay for a backup, but that's certainly not premier running back money.
No, and that's the thing. I mean, he's still on the last year of that rookie deal for him as well. So, it's something I think if they do end up needing to eat the money, they may be able and willing to do that. They saved about $5 million earlier this offseason by cutting LaRon Landry and Sean Phillips. So it's something I think they could do. They'd rather not do. But I do think there's going to be – it just feels like both sides are kind of digging in for a little bit of a fight there.
Just a reminder to our listeners that if you have a question, please call in at 585-633-7487. That's 585-633-7487. Now, this offseason, the Colts signed Duron Carter, who's the son of Chris Carter. And I think up until the news was about to break and you started hearing things on social media about it, I think people know very little about him. If you could tell Colts fans something about Duron, what would it be?
From everything that I've heard, and I obviously haven't gotten a lot of up-close looks at him myself, but from the people that I've talked to, he's very physically gifted. He's big, and that's one thing that this offense really hasn't had. I think he's 6'3", 6'4". There's obviously, you know how that goes. There's some debate over where that exactly falls. They'll probably find that out sometime in the spring when he's finally in-house and you get all that kind of stuff taken care of. But even at 6'3", he'd be right there with Dante Moncrief, and it's something that they really haven't had, that kind of size on this offense. I'm told that there's flashes of his dad at times, especially in the way that he uses his body to make the catch, but he's very raw. This is a guy who 2 years ago was on a practice squad up there in Canada for Montreal. Once he got on the field, though, I think a little over 1,900 yards in the last 2 years. So somebody that's full of potential, somebody that should be a big target for Andrew Luck, but I'm not sure somebody that's going to be ready to come in and have a major impact right away. I think maybe a role similar to what Dante Moncrief had this past season, where he's a 3/4 type of receiver and able to be used in some specific packages and maybe pick up a big play here.
George?
Yeah. Still there?
I'm sorry, you cut out on me. Were you finished with your answer?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, with Duron being added to the team, one of the things I wanted to ask you was, do you think Hakeem Nicks, who I think the Colts took a risk on him, bringing him in last year, and he really didn't seem to do too much until the very end of the season. Do you think he's getting squeezed out, or does he have a role on this team?
That's going to be one of the most interesting things, I think, to watch here. And Ryan Grigson's going to talk tomorrow at the Combine. I'm sure that's going to come up a little bit with him as well. But Nicks has mentioned late in the year, and I think a little bit during the postseason, kind of exit interviews that we do in a locker room, that he wants to come back, that he really enjoys playing with Andrew Luck, wants to be a part of this team. But as you mentioned, really it took until almost the playoffs to really start to see some production. He did make some big plays, specifically against Cincinnati, to help that team beat the Bengals. I don't think it's completely out of the question, but I would think that Reggie Wayne would be higher up the list, and they might even look at guys, some free agents. I've heard some talk about Jeremy Maclin. That might just be people connecting dots because Ryan Grigson was in Philadelphia when he was drafted there. But you could see them going in another direction very easily, but I wouldn't be surprised if Nix is maybe a plan B or plan C if some things don't work out in some other areas.
Jeremy Maclin would be an incredible addition to this team. I mean, the Colts would suddenly be an over-the-top, crazy good team if they're not one right now. And that gets me to our last question. And the context of it is the Colts seem to have, every year they've improved. They make it to the first round. They make it to the second round. They've made it to the AFC Championship. But the one team that is just killing the Colts is the Patriots, a team they've lost 4 straight to, an average of 29 points in each of those losses. So I guess my question here, and it could be 2 questions. One is sort of what kind of player could the Colts be targeting to bring in between now and the start of the season? Or is it more or less a philosophy or a mindset that the Colts need to get to in order to beat a team like the Patriots?
I think it really is a mindset. It's something that Ryan Grigson talked about in his postseason kind of news conference, that this team had to, in this offseason, he felt like this team would have a fire in its belly now because of what happened, because of the way the season ended, because of how ugly that loss was. And he said specifically that he wanted to go through the locker room and find the guys who didn't have that fire and get rid of them. So I think that there's going to be, I think there's some of that involved. And to me, that's a lot of the mental kind of makeup and the culture in there. But I think also, as I talked about at the top, they've got to find some guys in the front 7 on defense. They got to find some guys up front on offense who can get physical with the Patriots. Because really, if you look at those 4 games, the one common thing is the Patriots just kind of pushing the Colts around on both sides of the line of scrimmage and just kind of dictating to Indianapolis what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. They've got to find some guys who are going to step up in those situations, not allow that to happen. And until it does, they're probably going to keep running into a brick wall when they play New England.
George, I want to thank you again for coming on to the show and talking Colts football with us. For our listeners out there, that's George Bremer. You can follow George on Twitter at GMBremer. That is at GM Bremer. You can also hear him as a co-host of Colts Central Radio. And follow at THB Sports on Twitter for local prep news and the like. George, thanks again for joining us, and I hope to have you back in the near future.
No problem. Thanks. Anytime, guys.
Thanks, George. Keith, let's take a break.
Second to keep breathing in a moment before it's gone. You never know when others lost until you find just what it costs to be wrong. I wonder if you think of me passing by, you think you see me coming. I wonder if you pull me in, kiss me just one time again. You won't. Coming and the nights will keep on going till they're tired, falling fast asleep and as they dream of ghosts of beats filled with desire. The chance of life is all around, a chance to take is always